So are we now inured to this? I was just a moment ago speaking with a caller from Washington, D.C., and he made the point that, residents of Washington, D.C., who have no political power, right? D.C. has more people in it than the state of Vermont. D.C. has more people in it than the state of Wyoming. There may be other states that D.C. has more people in, but I know for sure of those two. And yet, they have no representation in Congress. Eleanor Holmes Norton is their representative in the House of Representatives. They're one representative, but she cannot vote. She cannot, she can speak, but that's about it. And even her ability to speak is narrowly circumscribed. And there's nobody representing Washington, D.C. in the United States Senate. And so he made the point that we've kind of learned helplessness. Marty Seligman was a psychologist. I believe he's passed away. I might be wrong. But he back in the 80s and 90s, he was doing some absolutely brilliant work, some of which has been heavily criticized in the years since because it involved dogs getting shocks. But he did this work about learned helplessness, and found that if you put a dog in a two-compartment bed. Two sides, left and right side, and one side, and put the dog on the left side and then give it a shock, it will jump to the right side. But if you put it in the left side and give it a shock and restrain it so it can't jump to the right side, after a short while and a certain number of shocks, the dog will just give up and just whimper every time it gets a shock. And then you take away all the restraints and the dog still does that. This is called learned helplessness. And I think this is happening in America. This is, like my op-ed today at HartmannReport.com. It's like, why aren't we getting the stuff that the majority of us want? The majority of Americans want debt-free college. The majority of Americans want a national health care system. The majority of Americans want Social Security strength. The majority of Americans want a higher minimum wage and the right to unionize. Why aren't we getting those things? Because for 42 years, billionaires and right-wing corporations have been running our politics. And now it's like, we've got this mass death in the United States. We had 1 million people die of COVID, more than any other country in the world. The New York Times reported that if Donald Trump and the United States government in 2020 had responded to COVID the same way that the Australian government, Scott Morrison's, who was a conservative, he was very much like Trump, Scott Morrison's conservative government in Australia, if we had responded the same way they did, we would have had 900,000 fewer deaths in this country. Let that sink in. We tolerated an additional 900,000 deaths because Donald Trump politicized COVID. And then we've got all these shootings. I mean, we've got an average of 100,000 shootings a year in the United States, 45,000 deaths. And we're just shrugging our shoulders? A guy buys a semi-automatic weapon of war and walks into a supermarket last week shooting black people because he can? Because he's trying to make black people feel like nothing's safe nowhere? He thinks he's kicking off the next, the race war, the civil war, the same as Tim McVeigh thought that and shooter after shooter has thought that? Have we learned helplessness here? Have we become inured to it? I'm beginning to think we have, and I think that the way to shake ourselves out of this is to start having successes. One of the things that Sullivan found with his dogs was that when he showed them, picked them up and moved them from the shock side to the non-shock side, oh, I can do that, and they figured out they didn't have to get shocked anymore.